Welcome to Simple Things, where small stories spark big changes and growth begins with honesty. Sometimes the hardest thing in the world is the simplest motion your face can make. For Evan, it was that curve, that slight rise of the cheek, the gentle lift of the lip, the smile. A gesture that came so easily to others like muscle memory, like sunlight breaking through a crack in the clouds. But to Evan, it was alien. It was armor. It was absence. He didn't always used to be that way. There are photos, old ones. You can see them scattered in the attic of his mind, a child with front teeth missing and Kool-Aid stains around the mouth, grinning like nothing could ever go wrong. And in those frozen moments, you'd swear he had joy coded into his DNA. But the truth is, something happened between then and now. Something slow, something quiet. And it took that smile piece by piece, like moths eating through silk. You see, Evan had learned the art of invisibility. Not the kind with capes or magic, but the one where your laughter is quiet enough not to draw attention, where your presence is neat, orderly, helpful, where you don't complain, don't ask for too much, don't cry when it hurts. Somewhere along the line, he convinced himself that his emotions were burdens, awkward suitcases others didn't want to carry. So he folded them, packed them away, neatly, tightly, smiles included. It started small skipping jokes in conversation, letting praise slide off like raindrops on a waxed coat. Then bigger, avoiding eye contact, choosing solitary lunches, not speaking unless spoken to. He told himself he was just tired, just introverted, just focused. But truthfully, he was numb. And numbness is a quiet kind of hell. Not fire and brimstone, but a sterile, endless gray. The irony, of course, was that everyone still saw Evan as fine. His co-workers called him reliable. His friends, when they remembered to check in, called him strong. His mother, bless her hopeful heart, still said things like, "You used to be such a happy kid." As if happiness was a switch and he had simply forgotten to flip it. But Evan knew. He knew that somewhere between survival and silence, he had lost the instinct to smile. Not just physically, but emotionally. It felt dishonest now. Like trying to speak a language he no longer understood until the day the elevator broke. It sounds silly, doesn't it? How could an elevator be the beginning of anything real? But that's where we begin. It was a Monday. Always a Monday. The kind that smelled like burnt coffee and stretched sleep. Evan, headphones and badge clipped, was running on autopilot when the elevator dinged and the lights flickered and the doors groaned open, revealing not the clean mechanical sigh of upward motion, but a sharp, jarring clunk, then a stop. And just like that, he was stuck with a stranger and no signal and silence thick enough to chew through. At first he did what he always did, nodded politely, avoided eye contact, retreated into his own head. The stranger, a young woman with a giant paint-splattered tote bag and a sketchbook covered in celestial stickers, sighed and flopped onto the elevator floor like it was a park bench. "Guess we're here a while," she said with a chuckle, opening the sketchbook. Evan gave a courteous nod. The kind that says, "Please don't talk to me." But the stranger, undeterred by social cues or discomfort, simply asked, "You always look that sad, or is today special?" He blinked. The words hit like a pebble thrown into a still lake. Not cruel, not mocking, just honest. He didn't answer. So she added, "You don't have to smile for me or anything. I just wondered if anyone ever asked." They hadn't. Not really. Not in years. And in that still metal box suspended between floors and lives, something shifted in Evan. Not a smile, not yet, but a flicker, a question, a breath. Because sometimes it isn't the world changing that makes the difference. It's the moment you realize someone actually sees you, even in silence. And that moment was about to unravel everything he thought he knew about smiling. The elevator started moving again 23 minutes later. But for Evan, something inside had already shifted. It wasn't dramatic, no grand epiphany, no sweeping orchestral score, just a lingering echo of a sentence. Do you always look that sad, or is today special? He didn't even know the stranger's name. She had drawn in her sketchbook the whole time, occasionally glancing up at him like she was sketching him in her head instead of on paper. When the doors finally opened and they stepped out into the chaos of the lobby, she simply said, "Maybe try smiling once, just to see how it feels. Doesn't have to be for anyone but you." Then she was gone, and Evan stood there in the crowd, blinking under the fluorescent lights, clutching his laptop bag like a lifeline, his face still neutral, his heart not quite. He walked to work like a man carrying invisible weight, but now for the first time aware of its heaviness. That night he sat on the edge of his bed in the dark, scrolling through photos on his phone. Not social media he hadn't posted in years, just the camera roll. Birthdays he showed up for, weddings he stood in the corner of, office parties with forced grins, so many pictures where he was physically present, emotionally vacant. The smiles in those photos weren't real. They were masks, reflexes born of politeness, not presence. He leaned forward toward the mirror, a cracked one above his desk that he rarely used. The harsh glow from his lamp caught his eyes just right. They looked tired. But something else too, like a person who had finally noticed his own absence. And then he did something strange. He tried to smile. Not for a selfie, not for anyone, just to see what it felt like the girl said. It was awful. His cheeks tightened awkwardly. His lips curled, then twitched, then fell. It looked nothing like the ease he remembered from childhood. This wasn't a smile. It was an imitation, a mechanical, broken thing. He laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was ridiculous. Smiling shouldn't feel like solving a math problem. And yet here he was, a grown man, mid-30s, trying to practice happiness in the mirror like an actor fumbling his lines. But beneath the embarrassment was a sliver of curiosity. Why had smiling become so difficult? What had changed? The answer wasn't in the mirror. It was buried in the years behind it. Evan began thinking in reverse. Not of the moments when he failed to smile, but the ones when he stopped trying. The slow, quiet betrayals of trust. The friendships that thinned out like old clothes. The job promotions that came with applause, but no joy. The nights lying awake pretending numbness was peace. It wasn't that he didn't want to smile. It was that it had stopped feeling safe. Somewhere his brain had linked vulnerability with danger. Smiling meant openness. Openness meant risk. Risk meant hurt. So he built armor, efficiency, predictability, competence. All the things he was praised for, they were really just clever disguises for fear. And then, without knowing why, Evan opened his laptop and typed into a search bar how to smile when it doesn't feel natural anymore. That's when he found the Reddit post. A random thread buried deep titled IWTL, How to Smile. Simple, desperate, real. He clicked. He read. And for the first time in months, maybe years, he felt less alone. There were others like him. People who once smiled easily, who now couldn't. People afraid of appearing fake, of forcing it, of not knowing what happy was supposed to feel like anymore. And then the comments, dozens of them. Vulnerable, kind, imperfect. One said, start with your eyes, not your mouth. Learn to feel warmth before you try to show it. Another, think of smiling not as a performance, but as an offering. One hit hardest of all. You're not broken. You're protecting something. You just forgot what it was. Evan closed the laptop, sat very still, and let those words breathe inside his chest. He wasn't broken. He wasn't lazy. He wasn't failing. He was protecting something, and maybe, just maybe, it was time to remember what. The next morning felt no different. The sky was still a dull gray. The alarm clock still shrieked at 6:00 a.m. with the same cold efficiency. Evan's toothbrush still tasted like minty obligation, and the coffee still scalded his tongue just slightly too much. But something barely perceptible, almost laughably small, had shifted. He lingered for an extra second, brushing his hair. He looked in the mirror, not through it. And when he caught a glimpse of himself, he didn't flinch or look away. It was the beginning. Not of joy, not yet, but of presence. At work, the fluorescent light still hummed like anxious bees overhead. His inbox still threatened to drown him. Meetings came and went with their usual cadence of nods and corporate euphemisms. But Evan had printed one of the comments from that Reddit thread, scribbled in black pen, and folded it in his wallet like a prayer. Smiling is not a performance. It's an offering. And he kept thinking, what would it mean if I offered something today? So he tried. It wasn't spectacular. He passed by a co-worker in the hallway. Carol from accounting, and instead of the usual stiff nod, he softened his mouth just slightly. A half smile. Not for show. Not for her. Just a signal I see you. She blinked, then smiled back. A full one. Warm. Natural. Evan's lips didn't hold the smile long, but something inside flickered. Later, he helped a junior developer who had spilled water on her keyboard. Normally, he'd just fix it, nod, move on. This time, he stayed, asked if she was okay, listened as she mumbled something about anxiety and tight deadlines and not sleeping much. He didn't offer advice, just offered silence and presence. And when she looked up embarrassed, clearly expecting him to roll his eyes or wave her off, she caught the curve of his lips just barely. "Thanks," she said, her voice cracking. And in that moment, Evan understood something so painfully obvious he nearly laughed. Smiling was never supposed to be about him. It was never meant to be an achievement, a badge of mental wellness, proof of happiness. It was a bridge, a breath, a pause in the noise of daily life to say, I'm here, you're here. That matters. Still, the practice wasn't easy. That night, Evan sat on his couch with a bowl of takeout curry and a documentary playing in the background, white noise for his otherwise quiet apartment. The loneliness hadn't vanished, nor had the protective habits. But he took out his phone and opened the front-facing camera. He stared. No filters, no angles. Just the tired face of a man who had built a life of control and forgotten how to be tender with himself. He took a breath. And this time, before trying to smile, he let himself feel something. Not forced joy, not imagined delight, just gratitude for surviving, for still being curious, for not giving up on something as deceptively small as a smile. His lips moved slowly, awkwardly. But this time the smile reached his eyes, not fully, not brightly, but honestly. And that's what mattered. The next day he started a routine. He called it the 3-second smile. Once a day. Only once. One moment of vulnerability, eye contact, and the smallest real smile he could offer to anyone. The barista, the bus driver, a stranger passing by. It was terrifying. It was exhilarating. Because every time he discovered the same surprising thing, people smiled back. Not everyone, not all the time, but enough to remind him that connection wasn't a lost language, it was a whisper waiting to be heard again. And bit by bit, like sunlight pushing through the blinds after a long winter night, Evan began to thaw. He smiled more. He felt more. And in that process, he began to recognize the part of himself he'd long buried, the child in the old photos, the one with Kool-Aid lips and crumpled socks who used to grin like life was something to be devoured. That boy wasn't gone. He was just waiting to be remembered. Healing never moves in straight lines. Some days Evan felt almost human again. His smiles were less mechanical, more spontaneous. He noticed things, the way sunlight dripped down the side of a building, the weird little laugh the barista made when flustered, the way his shoulders softened when someone said his name kindly. There were even mornings when he woke up without dread, just the ordinary ache of being alive. But then came the envelope. Cream-colored, slightly crumpled, buried in a pile of junk mail. No return address. Just his full name, handwritten in black ink, the kind of handwriting you never forget once you've seen it shaking in grief. Inside a wedding invitation. You are cordially invited to the union of Claire and James. He didn't read the rest. Didn't need to. His breath hitched. Time stuttered. Claire. The last person he'd ever truly smiled for. Before silence became his language. Before he put on the mask of reliability. Before he began believing that feelings were dangerous things. She had been everything soft in a world too sharp, a quiet laugh in dim corners of the world. She saw through him like stained glass, full of cracks and color. For a time, she loved him and he loved her, though he never quite said it right. He'd smile when she entered a room, laugh in a way that echoed into the walls, kiss her forehead with the kind of reverence usually reserved for prayers. But he pushed her away. With silence, with avoidance, with the belief that he wasn't worthy of light. He never told her why. And she, tired of trying to pull him back from a place he wouldn't name, eventually let go. That was 5 years ago. He hadn't really smiled since. The envelope sat on the kitchen counter for 2 full days before he touched it again. Every time he walked by it, he could feel the ghosts of who he was and who he might have been. It wasn't just a wedding invitation, it was a mirror, a call, a reminder that he had buried a version of himself alongside her absence. He had 2 choices. Pretend it didn't matter, burn the letter, delete her contact, slip back into the safety of numbness, or face the truth. He had stopped smiling the day he stopped forgiving himself. It wasn't Claire who broke him. It wasn't the world. It wasn't circumstance. It was the quiet decision over and over again to disappear from himself. And now here he was standing in front of his bathroom mirror once more, same cracked edge, same tired eyes, trying to decide if the man in the reflection deserved grace. Evan looked at his own face the way you look at an old friend you once abandoned. And then almost imperceptibly, he whispered to it, "I'm sorry I left you here alone." His voice cracked. He placed a hand on his chest, not theatrically, but instinctively trying to feel something real. And he did. Grief, not for Claire, for himself, for all the years he spent shrinking, smothering light, making himself small and silent so he wouldn't be hurt again. He cried, not the clean, cinematic kind, but ugly, messy, wrenching sobs that left his shirt damp and his ribs aching. And when the tears quieted, something strange happened. He smiled, not wide, not perfect, but real. Because forgiveness had found its way into the room. He wouldn't attend the wedding. He didn't need to. That wasn't the point. The point was standing in his own life again, choosing for the first time in a very long time to be whole, even if only in pieces. That night he opened a fresh page in his notebook. At the top he wrote, "Things that make me smile even when it hurts." He stared at the blank space for a while. Then he wrote, "That moment when someone genuinely sees me. The first breath after crying. The idea that I can still change. The sound of rain at 3 a.m. Forgiveness." He underlined that last one, twice. By the time autumn came, Evan had changed not all at once and not in the ways people usually talk about when they say someone's doing better. He didn't start running marathons. He didn't dye his hair or quit his job to find himself. His apartment still looked the same. His routine still involved spreadsheets, lukewarm coffee, and the soft hum of the city outside his window. But he smiled now. And not just with his face, it was in the way he looked people in the eye when he said thank you. In the warmth that slipped into his voice when he asked a stranger how their day was. In the notes he left for himself on the fridge, "You did enough today. Be kind. You deserve it too." Something had softened in him. He had learned sometimes the hardest way possible that smiling wasn't a signal of having no pain. It was a choice to make space for light despite it. It wasn't denial. It wasn't performance. It was rebellion in the gentlest form, an act of radical hope. He had become someone who smiled at the bus stop, not waiting for one in return, but because he knew what it meant to feel invisible. He had become someone who asked people's names, remembered them, and said them like they mattered. He had become someone who, when he caught himself slipping back into the old shell, the safe silence, the neutral mask would pause, breathe, and say, "I'm still here." Evan started writing again. Not a memoir, not a blog, just pages in a leather notebook, each one beginning with the same question. What did I notice today that made me want to smile? Some entries were long stories about kind gestures or quiet mornings. Others were just one line. A kid singing on the subway, the way sunlight hit the edge of my desk, hearing someone laugh and not being afraid to join in. He started sharing these notes with others. At first it was subtle, scribbled on sticky notes he'd leave in break rooms. "You matter more than your deadlines. Smiling isn't weakness, it's resilience with good lighting." Then he started a small online thread. #reasons to smile. People responded, hundreds, then thousands. Not because he was extraordinary, but because he was honest. He spoke the language of quiet struggle, and in doing so, helped others find their way through it too. One day, as he was leaving a grocery store, an elderly man with a cane struggled to load bags into the back seat of his rusted sedan. Evan walked over without hesitation, helped him. No big speech, no fuss, just kindness. As the man finished, he looked at Evan and said, "People don't smile much anymore, but you do. You remind me of someone I used to know." Evan smiled, a full one. "Maybe you still do," he replied. That night he walked home slower than usual. The city glowed, not brighter, just clearer. And somewhere, maybe in a corner of the universe where forgotten things wait to be remembered, the boy he once was, the one with Kool-Aid lips and a fearless laugh, finally smiled back. He had come home to himself. But this wasn't the end. Healing doesn't end. It grows, evolves, expands. Tomorrow, Evan might wake up and feel the weight again. He might catch his reflection on a hard day and see the old tiredness behind the eyes. But now, he has a choice. He knows the path back to light. He knows how to smile, not because the world is perfect, but because he no longer needs it to be. And somewhere, someone maybe like him, maybe like you, is still searching for that same small, impossible thing. Maybe they'll find it in a moment. Maybe they'll find it in you. And when they do, will you smile back?